This is the Dairy Download, brought to you by EverAg Insights and the International Dairy Foods Association, where we offer extra sharp market and policy insights on dairy. I'm your host, Phil Plord.
And I'm your co-host, Kathleen Wolfley.
This week's episode is all about cybersecurity. Our two guests are watching for trouble every day with implications for the dairy industry and consumers. We'll get to that in a minute. But first, Kathleen, where are we now?
Well, Phil, CME spot prices as of Wednesday, October 15th. CME block cheddar closed at $1.71, down 3 cents on the week. Barrels finished at $1.74, unchanged. Spot butter is trading around $1.67, a 2-cent decline on the week. And the spot non-fat market closed at $1.12, a 4-cent decline. And that's the lowest price since April 2024. Phil, my most important thing right now is lower EU cheese prices. EEX mozzarella specifically was trading this week at $1.58, down another 3% from the week before. GDT mozzarella prices from last week were trading a bit lower than that. I know we've said this more than once on this podcast, but if the U.S. needs to export cheese in order to keep supply from building in any significant way here going into 2026, U.S. cheese prices will likely need to come down. We don't have a ton of history on EEX mozzarella prices, but I will say it's worth noting that back in late 2022, early 2023, we did see those mozzarella values tumble versus the US CME block price and stayed that way for at least a quarter. And in response, we did see US exports into contested regions, so basically US cheese exports out of Mexico, decline on a year-over-year basis in response. So lots of questions around what 2026 cheese exports could look like, but I suspect if we want to keep the pipeline full, U.S. prices will need to move lower to stay competitive with Europe.
I think you're on the right track there, Kathleen, because my most important thing right now, I'm just going to take a step backwards from where you are, or raise the plane a few thousand feet and say that EU milk production is the most important thing right now, because no one had the kind of numbers that we're seeing over the past several weeks out of Europe. We had the Netherlands up 4.8% in the month of August. And so we've gone from an environment where we're saying, maybe Europe can squeak out a little bit of a gain to more than 1% growth probably collectively. And I think the bigger question is this temporary or is it durable? I think the knee jerk is to say, well, it's temporary. It's, better weather, better feed, less disease. And I get that. But at the same time, producers all over the world respond to economic incentives, and the incentives have been to make more milk in Europe. And what is the definition of temporary, right? Is it 2 months? Is it 2 quarters? I don't know. But if the European milk production is going to be up by 1% more than people expected, frankly, the world doesn't have much room for that supply today. We have plenty, with the U.S. doing what it's doing and New Zealand kind of doing well. And just to build on your point, this milk production surge has been problematic for markets. So you noted EX mozzarella 158. That's 29% below where it was at the end of the first half of the year. Butter 275 Dutch quotation at 80% fat. That's down 28% from where we were at the beginning of the second half of the year. And similarly, non-fat dry milk, skim milk powder down to $1.12 per pound. That's down 11%. So I think the U.S. milk production situation has contributed to that weakness in global prices, but this turn on in milk has certainly brought EU prices down substantially, and there's no way that doesn't have implications for U.S. markets.
I think that leads me, Phil, to a question of, okay, when do European producers start to respond to lower prices? It's the same question that we're having here in the U.S., but as we've seen over history, it takes longer for these weaker prices to filter their way into European values at the farm level than they even do here in the U.S. So
it's not only whether lower prices, it's when will lower prices appear, actually, right? Because there's no federal order system in Europe that's dictating, mozzarella's at 159 and, milk prices are going to come down by some formulaic measure accordingly. It's a very different system, and the rides up and down tend to be much more gentle than what we see here in the U.S. So, and by the way, European milk production is bigger than the is bigger than U.S. milk production, right?
Yeah,
It's not.
1.6 times the size of the US.
Yeah, so that's why we're paying attention. Stat of the week time. What do you got?
Okay, so I stumbled across this survey from JP Morgan that showed some interesting discrepancies, though not surprising. So it was looking at how confident are consumers in the trajectory of the US economy over the next 12 months, and it looked at it by income bracket. High income consumers rated their confidence at 6.2 out of 10, while low income consumer confidence was at 4.4. So as we think about what does the future look like for spending in the US, whether it's through the holiday season or on into 2026, it sure seems like the upper income consumer could continue to help drive this economy. And Wall Street has been performing fairly well here in the last few weeks as well. So I think we're in a position where high income consumers still have money to spend, whereas the low income and middle income consumers are continuing to tighten their belts, and they're not necessarily seeing those economic windfalls off of gains in Wall Street.
Yeah, and when you start, I mean, depending on what measure you're looking at, the top 10% is, not the majority, right? Or whatever, the top five, top two, whatever slice of the economic pie you want to, the economic spectrum you want to look at. The upper end is the upper end, and it's not the majority by definition. So, and pick your measure. I mean, we stumble on them, every day, or every week. Certainly, that tells a similar story.
All right, what's your stat of the week?
Well, 96 cents. 96 cents is my stat of the week. And that's how much the price of butter in the United States, CME spot price, has fallen since the last week of June, which is basically the end of Q2. We've dropped 96 cents. And if you go back and look back at history, we're more or less double the biggest decline we'd ever seen previously. So we say, well, this feels like a historic decline. Well, in fact, it is. And it's even more jarring when you look at it. Last year, I think it was 51 cents in the comparable period, which is pretty big, but it was starting at a higher price point, right? And so, we have $1.70-ish butter here. Or last week was $1.60 where this measure was taken. We haven't seen that kind of pricing since 2021. So a precipitous fall. And if you thought it felt a little like a big drop, well, in fact, biggest drop ever for the period that we're talking about.
Well, and then you look at the futures market, and the futures market show a big pop in prices between February and March. So I think it's an interesting next 6 months ahead.
I think you look at the futures curve and there's a lot of premium out there, and you think, well, why is that? And I think that, we're hitting the reset button here. And I think this ride has been so jarring. I don't think people know what to do. Or how to think about things. I think it's going to take a while, for things to settle down. Are we going to promote a lot more at Thanksgiving? Is it going to drive sales? What does that mean? Et cetera, et cetera. How does the European picture fit into this? So it's been a wild ride, and we'll see. Now, I'm just going to shift right to my fearless prediction.
Okay, go for it.
Because I think that the butter market being the butter market, I'm going to predict that we will see at least one print of CME spot butter at $2 between now and year end. It's going to be a fleeting moment, but I think it's going to happen.
Do you want to double down on that, Phil?
What does that mean? Double down?
Are you willing to pick the day or the week that we're going to see?
My. Well, just let me look at my calendar for a second here, and I'll take a shot at it, because I have a hunch that it could happen like in a little vacuum. I'm going to say it's going to happen the week of November 10th. You just begging me to be wrong and wronger. Thank you.
Well, when I gave you the preview of my prediction earlier, you kind of gave me the raised eyebrows. So I think I've got a pretty bold prediction coming myself. So,
okay, what do you got?
With that in mind, all right, I think we will see CME block cheddar cheese trade sub 130 for at least one day in first half 2026.
I'd say that's crazy until you consider that if European cheese is at 160, that might be what, we were last year, if you recall, in 2024, We had to go to 140-ish to kind of shake the trees and get some export deals done.
Yeah.
So, all right. Who's the biggest bear in town? Her name's Kathleen.
I have been reading a lot of Berenstain Bears books, so maybe that's just
There
I'm
you go. It's just sort of
piling
it's
on.
all in your head.
It's October. It's spooky season, and Phil, our first guest, definitely left me feeling like there were maybe a couple ghosts hanging out in my office. Let's talk cybersecurity.
Today's guest is Jonathan Braley, the Director of Food and Agriculture ISAC. Jonathan and his team produce curated threat analyses for the sector and represent the organization to policymakers and industry stakeholders. He also serves as the Director of Threat Intelligence for the Information Technology, Information Sharing and Analysis Center, where he acts as the technical and analytic lead for a team supporting the world's leading technology companies. Jonathan, welcome to the Dairy Download.
Happy to be here.
So tell us a little bit about the Food and Ag ISAC. What's its role, and where does it intersect with the world of cybersecurity?
Sure. Yeah, I always like to bring up the history of the ISACs because I think they're not always as well known as we'd like. But back in 1998, there was actually a presidential directive that asked each of the critical infrastructure sectors to create their own information sharing organization. So most of the ISACs have been around for well over 20 years. However, there was never a formal ISAC for the food and agriculture industry. So we also run the IT ISAC, as you mentioned earlier. We had a special interest group within that since around 2013, where we actually had a whole bunch of food and agriculture companies. Basically, we gave them a forum to share cyber threat information. So as of May 2023, that special interest group became the formal Food and Ag ISAC, and here we are today. And essentially what we do is we help food and agriculture sector companies share threats, we share best practices, and we act as kind of a force multiplier against adversaries. So what we're doing is building out these kind of peer-to-peer relationships. Members are sharing information. I have a team that is also proactively looking for threat actors that are targeting the food and agriculture sector. And then through that, we're helping share information. We're developing thought leadership pieces, best practice documents. And then what's great is not only are our members benefiting, but we're also creating public resources as well, because we know that the supply chain is so important. A lot of smaller partners and suppliers, so we're trying to collect the information we're receiving from the ISAC and then distribute that, broadly throughout the sector so that everybody is more protected.
All right, Jonathan, anybody that's worked in an office or with a company, I feel like with more than 10 people, you've probably taken a cybersecurity course at least once a
Mhm.
year, right? So what are some of the things that ISAC and specifically food and agriculture, what are some of the targets and what are some of the things that people should be looking out for?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's a lot of the cyber threat actors that we see are opportunistic, especially if we look at ransomware groups. So I think one of the challenges that we're always trying to vocalize is, companies will often say we're too small to be targeted, or why would an adversary want to target me? And I think what we try to point out is that because it's opportunistic, they're going to go after basically everybody. We see attacks across all sectors, and the food and agriculture sectors, unfortunately pulled into that quite a bit. There's a lot of valuable information in the food and agriculture sector. We have, proprietary information. There's a lot of sensitive details that would be beneficial for, say, a nation state adversary if they're trying to bolster their own food production. If they're trying to be less reliant on food imports, they're going to be looking for some of that data. Some of that long-term genetic intellectual property can be very valuable. And then I would say for some of the smaller partners and suppliers, the cybercrime is also very potent as well, right? So I think we're all familiar with ransomware. We've been seeing food and agriculture companies targeted from ransomware actors. And, I think the nature of cybercrime is we're seeing a steady increase year after year. So hopefully that answers your question.
So yeah, you mentioned at the end there, Jonathan. So is it getting worse or is it getting better? Or there's always stories out there, but talk about the arc of where things are in terms of the threat levels and deterrence and sort of the back and forth between the good guys and the bad guys.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's getting worse or better. What I will say is I think the level of sophistication of some of these actors is getting better, and some of the um, ecosystems of cybercrime are getting larger and more sophisticated. At the same time, I think there's a larger awareness than ever before that cybersecurity is something that we need to pay attention to and bolster our defenses for. It's a double-edged sword there. Cyber criminals are getting better at crafting techniques. They're finding exploits. There's a lot more cybercrime happening, but at the same time, I think collectively we are also bolstering our own defenses, right? Even the stock Windows Defender and things like that are getting more powerful than they were before. Companies are sharing with one another. I know that the government, CISA, and other organizations have done a good job of updating, the public on threats that they're seeing, and then organizations like myself, some of these information sharing communities are definitely getting together and trying to tackle that problem.
And I imagine, like everything else, AI's poked its head into this game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's been, I would say, over the past year or two, a big development. So the generative AI stuff that's happening is becoming a challenge for organizations. So you can think of a lot of the cybercrime that we see actually comes from foreign nations, and there's a couple of reasons for that. One is some of these countries where the cybercrime is coming from, they don't prosecute these cyber criminals. So even if we figure out who they are, we can't extradite these people unless they leave the country. So that's been a challenge. But there's always been a language barrier. I think we've all seen phishing emails, and sometimes the easiest way to spot them historically was that there would be typos and bad English. And now with generative AI, we're seeing perfect English. And I think the other challenge is it's lowering the barrier of entry for adversaries as well. So now they can say, hey, craft me up a phishing email. I need to develop a piece of malware that can do this. I want to be able to scan my target's network and see all the different hardware and software they're using. There's tools available now, oftentimes for free, where adversaries are getting basically the benefits of AI to help them kind of one, develop how they want to attack, and then two, it helps them masquerade themselves as different entities to make that social engineering aspect more work better.
If the listeners are anything like me, conversations like this always make me a little like, ooh, nervous. So, what are a couple of the best practices that you recommend or steps that folks and companies can take to improve their cybersecurity?
Sure. So, the first thing I would recommend, and it's a little biased, but we do have a website, foodandag-isac.org, and we're producing a lot of public resources. So we did create a cybersecurity guide for small and medium-sized businesses. And the focus of that document is we wanted 10 low cost, easy to implement things that you can do to kind of it gives you a starting point to kind of break into cybersecurity and make sure you're doing the most basics of things. And what we found is a lot of adversaries, they're going after low hanging fruit. So if you can just do some of these basic things off the bat, that's going to put you in a much better spot. But as far as best practices, phishing remains the most common initial access method that we see. We see low skilled cyber criminals using phishing attacks, and then we see very sophisticated nation state groups using phishing attacks. And one of the reasons for that is it's a lot easier to get legitimate credentials for a victim and breach the network that way than it is to, come up with an exploit, find a vulnerable system, develop a custom piece of malware. That all takes a lot of effort, right? So before they do any of that, they're going to try phishing because that if you can just break in that way, it's a lot easier. So things I kind of recommend in that regard is regularly testing your employees, right? We want to have a system or a service in place where we're sending these phishing emails out, we're seeing who's clicking them, and then we're training employees on how to spot things like bad domains, bad links, some of the common social engineering attempts that we see. That's going to help improve your overall security posture, and it'll also help you identify who maybe these employees are that are more likely to accidentally click these links, right? So you can give them additional training.
So let's talk about the bad side of, okay, something bad happens. You have a cybersecurity breach. Mm-hmm. Who should companies reach out to? What should they do first? Talk through the process of, oh no, something went awry. We've got a problem here. Yep. What do we do?
Yeah, and I'll caution again, going back to the statement earlier of we're too small to be targeted. Unfortunately, with cyber attacks, it's often a matter of when, not if, it's going to happen to you. But that doesn't mean that it's going to be the end of the world. I mean, a lot of times cyber events do get caught and stopped before anything bad happens. But what I would kind of recommend to organizations is have a business continuity plan, have a disaster recovery plan so that when you do have a cyber event, you're not all of a sudden scrambling on what to do. So You should know who's responsible when there is an incident, right? You should know your IT staff and security staff, and they should be already scanning your network, and they should know what to do when they do see something anomalous happen. The other thing is backup software. Definitely in the age of ransomware, we want to make sure that we are backing up our systems. So not only do you need to back those up, you need to ensure that it's working. So from time to time, you need to check that backup and ensure that it's actually correctly backing up the software you want. Then you also need to know how to restore systems, right? If you just have the backups going and you're collecting all the data, but you've never actually restored, when the day comes where you have a cyber incident, you want to make sure that that works correctly. And then the other advice I would have is, have your cybersecurity insurance provider contact on hand if you have an incident. You should retain some sort of third-party remediation firm for a worst-case scenario, right? Build a relationship ahead of time so that when you do have an incident, you can call that person directly, kind of speed the process up of getting the remediation firm to come in and kind of help you there. The other thing I would say in the event of, say, a ransomware attack, which I think is some of the more common things we see, you also can reach out to organizations like your local FBI field office. They often, one, want the evidence, right? Because it helps us kind of stop the cybercrime. But there have been a lot of cases where the FBI has actually been able to disrupt certain ransomware groups. There's been times where they've actually found recovery keys for victims. And I've even heard stories of them actually tracking down some of the ransom payments and giving those funds back to organizations as well. The challenge with this is, it's expensive. So remediating a cyber attack can definitely be costly. I think the goal is to try to stop that from happening in the first place. So following those best practices, monitoring threat actors, what the latest tactics and techniques are, following an ISAC for your sector and trying to get information on what they're seeing, I think is super important to try to bolster your own security.
So you mentioned contact your cybersecurity insurance provider. Have we seen more and more companies securing that kind of coverage? And I assume it's like sort of a baseline recommendation these days.
Yeah, I think more so than the past few years, I would say most organizations probably are looking or have cybersecurity insurance. A couple of reasons for that is if you're working with other larger partners and suppliers as well, oftentimes they'll require you to have it. And at the same time, it's just so important to have. I mean, the cost of a cybersecurity incident is just it's horribly expensive. So I would recommend organizations look into that. The other kind of good thing I've seen with cybersecurity insurance is that they're lowering rates for organizations the better security posture they have. But I think that's also helping us, forcing companies to try to take security seriously, right? Because if they can get lower premiums and things like that because they're doing certain things, I think that's a good kind of trend. On the bad side of cybersecurity insurance, and it's not really a fault against them, but we do know that there's cases where they're paying the ransoms for their customers that are using them, right? So that's kind of proliferating the ransomware um, landscape, right? Because they know that these companies have cybersecurity
Yeah,
insurance.
because
I've even heard stories of them figuring out which insurance they have if they got into your email and then knowing the maximum coverage and things like that, and then basing the ransom demands there. But I think it's crucial. It's important. I think if you don't have cybersecurity insurance, it's probably a good idea to look into. Just again, going back to that, it's a matter of when, not if, it can happen to you. So the more prepared you are, I think the better.
Let's think about the future. What emerging trends do you think organizations should prepare for in the next couple years?
Yeah, I think we touched on AI a little bit. I think that's been the big talking point lately. Again, the lower barrier of entry for cyber criminals. We're going to see more sophisticated phishing attacks, social engineering. Another aspect of it, which I don't think we touched on, was we've been seeing a lot of reports of voice phishing. So they actually can take a soundbite of somebody at your organization, and then they can easily use AI technology to kind of sound like that person. So they could call it on the phone, call your IT help desk. So there's going to be a need for us to have better controls in place. If somebody calls in and says, "Hey, I'm locked out of my account," um, we can't just blindly accept that anymore, right? Because it's going to sound like that person. I've even heard of video deep fakes where they're, even have a video of the person on the calls. So things that I've already heard organizations doing is, hanging up and calling the manager or calling the person directly to make sure that it's the actual person you're talking to. You could have some sort of secret codes internally where this person would also need additional knowledge, almost like multi-factor authentication. But no, I think AI is going to proliferate. And then ransomware, we track ransomware pretty heavily. So we've been tracking ransomware attacks across all sectors going back to 2020. And year after year, we're seeing kind of that steady increase. This year, we've been up in certain months 150% from a ransomware volume. And again, because it's opportunistic, unfortunately, food companies are just by the nature of it going to get pulled into this. So doing what you can, following best practices to prevent ransomware, following security blogs and things like that are monitoring some of these more recent groups, especially the more prominent ones, trying to stay on top of what their typical tactics are for breaching organizations, I think is going to be ever important. And I wish I had an answer for how do we solve the ransomware problem. But aside from everyone stop paying, I think we're going to have to focus more on how do we prevent that from happening in the first place. But those are kind of the two emerging threats that I would kind of prepare for. The AI is going to proliferate. We need to kind of understand that a little bit better and have some protections in place for some of these more sophisticated kind of phishing and social engineering attempts. And then ransomware, I think, unfortunately, is going to continue kind of be a problem for the next few years.
Well, Jonathan, really appreciate you joining us on the Dairy Download and giving us a bit more information on what you're seeing in terms of cybersecurity and what your organization is doing to help, and maybe
Sure.
raising the anxiety level of our listeners
Mhm.
as well.
Yeah, I hate to be Dr. Doom, but it's it's not always fun on the cybersecurity side.
Now let's get the cheese manufacturer perspective.
We're excited today to have Chris Gaucher with us. Chris is the Senior Manager of Cybersecurity at Hilmar, where he leads enterprise-wide security operations across the company's Hilmar, Dalhart, and Dodge City locations. With a career rooted in military discipline and private sector innovation, Chris brings 24/7 vigilance to protecting critical infrastructure and digital assets in the dairy industry. Chris, welcome to the Dairy Download.
Hey, thanks so much for having me today, Phil.
I think the measure of success of today's interview is how scared we are by the middle. I think that's the way these things usually go. But let's start very basic. What are the main goals of cybersecurity protection, cybersecurity, and what do you think are the biggest challenges or risks for the dairy industry today?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. You're probably not going to like the response because cybersecurity is not as sexy as Hollywood makes it seem. It's really all about keeping the business going, continuity of business. If the business can't operate, you're not making money. So cybersecurity, really, the main goal is keeping the business up and running, enabling the business. And the interesting thing is, the biggest challenges that we see, and it's really no different than any other industry, it's the people. And there's two aspects to that, I would say. One part is our end users. Those are the people that run our business. Those are the ones with whom we've got trust to run the business. We're here to protect them, and equally, they've got a responsibility to protect one another. It's kind of a shared responsibility model. I don't know if your audience has heard that before, but it's probably been discussed over the last 10, 12 years that it's a shared responsibility. I talked about two risks, both being people. The second risk is the lack of technical support, the lack of technical cybersecurity specialists within an organization that are there to defend against those who would do us harm. So really, I'd say the biggest challenges are making sure our end users are well aware of what their responsibilities are to secure our company's data, our company's infrastructure, and keep the business running. And the second is the lack of technical expertise in order to help do that. I don't know if that's what you wanted to hear, but it's really not as sexy as Hollywood says it is.
Well, even absent dramatic takedowns and various plots, and I think many of us have taken enough cybersecurity training by now to know one thing. I'd be curious about your reaction to this. Is there a temptation to just think, oh, well, that couldn't happen to me? And almost certainly it can happen to anybody, right?
Yeah. Well, that's a good point. When an attacker is going through their tactic, their technique of getting someone to do something that they would not normally do, they're relying on what we call the FUD factor, the fear, the uncertainty, the doubt, and oftentimes it comes with a sense of urgency. So take this one case in point. Imagine, if you will, Alice is sitting there at her office one day, and it's 3:30 on a Friday. She gets a call from Bob. who she thinks is Bob, or an email from Bob. And the email says, "Hey, Alice, our monthly invoicing has changed. We're changing the account number to which you need to send funds. But listen, we got to do it quickly. It's got to be by 4 o'clock today. Can you get that done?" What's Alice going to do? Well, it's 3:30 on a Friday. She's about ready to leave, and the bill's due in half an hour. What's she going to do? Well, she's got a good relationship with Bob. She's going to make the change. She's going to make the payment. And unfortunately, in that particular case, funds went to an account that was not legitimate. It was not that vendor's account. That's very common in every industry, is that social engineering attack that we often see it, whether it's by phone or email. There's this inherent trust that some users have, but you got to stop. You got to think. You got to act. Is that out of the norm? Is it normal to get an email from Bob asking for that information to be changed?
To your point, cybersecurity is not just email. It's not just text messages or things like that. It's
Right.
phone calls. It's we talked a little earlier today about the AI factor, and
Mm-hmm.
you're able to recreate voices, recreate visuals of people. So how do you as a company help to protect against that?
Yeah, I've been in this industry quite some time, not just the dairy industry, but rather the cybersecurity profession, even before it was called that. And it's all about professional skepticism. It's important that you put yourself in the context of the information you're receiving. If you get something, see something that doesn't quite look right, more often than not, that uncertainty and that doubt and that uncomfortable feeling is legitimate, and you should question it. So when I do training, doesn't matter where it is, I always tell people, "Hey, you see something, say something," because someone else may have received the same information, seen the same thing, and you can learn from one another. It's okay to pause. Um, it's not rocket science. No one's going to die. No one's getting shot at in this particular case, as far as I can tell. But it's not brain surgery. No one's going to die. That's kind of what I bottom line it with.
Let's focus on what you're doing with Helmar. How, in your mind, can dairy companies work to identify and assess cybersecurity risks in your business?
That's a good question. I probably take two dimensions to this. One is internal, one's external. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. Internal, within the industry itself, we've got some tremendous resources. For those of you in the audience who are technical and maybe in the IT or operational technology field within dairy, I'll give a shout out to Rob Carpenter. He does a great job directing our digital technology innovation network as part of the IDFA. We get together regularly. We share our ideas. We share things that we're seeing, because sometimes it's not just you that's seeing it. Others will see things as well. What kind of technology decisions are you considering? What vendors have you worked with that you trust? So that having that internal peer-to-peer network within the industry really helps you to identify and assess cybersecurity risks and what others are experiencing. So you don't have to be the first one. The second thing I'd say is it's good to get an external perspective. I like to reach out to vendors who do penetration testing and pick this, not pick the same vendor every year to get that different perspective. If you get a third party, independent third party to look at your systems, that's a great way to assess risks. Someone's not um, particularly influenced by or doesn't have a bias towards your particular environment, and can really assess and provide you some great ideas, because they've also seen it somewhere else, right? If they're seeing the same thing at other locations, other customers, they will share that during their engagement. So I would say reach out to your peers, reach out to industry, and get that great, valuable information exchange from both resources.
Let's say, Chris, that something goes awry and we push the wrong button, and all of a sudden we've created an incident. What then? What's the recommendation for? Okay, we now have a
Yeah.
problem. What's the best course of action if now, okay, we're in an incident?
Well, it's really not if, but when. So every company really should be prepared to respond to when bad things happen. You've probably heard of muscle memory. I would say get to a point where you've got plans in place, you're practicing them on a regular basis, and you've introduced some kind of muscle memory. Because when you practice, it's a lot different than real life. In real life, your blood pressure's up, your heart rate's up. I liken it to, get 5 blind people in a room with an elephant, and one is going to touch the trunk and say, "Oh, it's a snake." Someone's going to touch a leg and say, "Oh no, this is a tree." You'll find during the exercise that everyone's got a different perspective based on what their role is in the organization, how they communicate, how they see things. If you don't practice that, when bad things happen, you're gonna get conflict of perspective, and you're gonna get decisions made not based on the best information that you can get. So I'd say have a plan in place, practice it, and probably most importantly, be able to communicate. When bad things happen, you may not have access to email. You may not have access to a file share in which your plan is stored. So you got to think about that. How is it you're going to communicate? It's kind of the fog of war, as we say. When the fog of war happens, they don't act as they would normally. So I'd say get a plan in place, practice it, and most importantly, understand how to communicate.
So I wonder, so Hilmar has you on board. So obviously, you're accustomed, this is what you do for a living, right? You work these plans. And
Right.
what are good resources for people that may not have the same sort of internal resources like yourself at Hilmar? Where do they turn for help?
One of the things that I follow personally is the National Institute of Standards and Technologies Cybersecurity Framework. If you look at that, and there's lots of executive summaries you can pull from online, there is some guidance within the detect and respond area of that particular framework. And from that will point to templates that you can use for response plans. So I'd say spend some time within that framework, get an idea as to how a plan might best fit your business. And sometimes the best way is just to get in a room with a bunch of people and say, "Hey, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? Will this work? Will that work? How are we going to communicate when things go bad?" And it'll develop that muscle memory over some time. It'll also develop trust between and amongst the group, which is really, really important. And are you going to get things right? No, you won't. But the key is to learn from those things that you do wrong. It's not something you can do annually. It's really got to be something you do fairly periodically, because people come and go, roles change, the plan should change because your business does.
And the cat and mouse game changes too, right?
Oh yeah, from a cyber perspective, new techniques are used by those that would do us harm, and you have to be able to respond in kind.
So Chris, Hilmar's in a unique situation, similar to most other businesses, in that you have plant infrastructure, you have a headquarters, and I'm sure you also have folks that are working remote, but ultimately reliant on remote work environments, cloud computing, etc. How do you address security with so many people and so many different types of internet usages?
I really focus on the people, the awareness that they must have to better understand the context in which they're working really manages the exposure to the company. So it's really it's down to the people. It's a very complex job. It's important that you understand where the jewels are, so to speak, the crown jewels as we call them. In a bank, it's where the money is, and you take a very risk-based approach on that. So as long as the people understand what their roles are and how they manage their exposure and the company's exposure, and they understand what's important, it can all work together successfully.
Well, Chris, really appreciate you joining us on the Dairy Download and sharing your experiences with our listeners.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kathleen and Phil, for the opportunity, and be happy to come back anytime.
That's a wrap for today's show. As always, we want to thank our production team, Matt Herrick, Mariah Minnick, Andrew Jerome, and Jeff Cullen at IDFA, and Abby Bauer over here at EverAg. If you are interested in what Kathleen and I do for our day jobs, check us out at ever.ag. Remember, if you enjoy the show, hit the subscribe button, leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform, and tell a friend.
Thanks for listening to the Dairy Download. Until next time, stay sharp.